Dick to light our chalice for us and invite you to stand and speak aloud our affirmation. The affirmation is printed in your chat or on your order of service. And if you're online, please stay muted. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. For these high purposes do we unite in worship. Please.
Thank you. For the honor of joining you again in this sacred place as part of the Coping with Climate series. Thanks particularly to Mary Oken for coordinating this service today and for the series organizing committee. Last week, as you've heard, NASA released the spectacular first images from the James Webb Space Telescope. As powerful as it is, however, it could not directly see Earth, even from the nearest star. Our planet is small and inconspicuous on a cosmic scale, but we have seen its beauty in images from spacecraft. I expect many of us evoked those images earlier. In other recent news includes extreme heat and flooding. Not all is well on our home planet. Climate change is a stress multiplier. For example, Southwest Colorado has a long history of drought, but climate change has made our current drought the longest and deepest in the 1,200 years of tree ring records. Climate stress multiplication applies especially in the social realm. Disadvantaged peoples and countries suffer more because of structural inequalities. For example, climate change exacerbates healthcare inequities, including between women and men, just as COVID-19 did. Likewise, poor countries indebted under the legacy of political and economic colonialism need funding for climate adaptation. One such country is Sri Lanka, another subject of this week's news. But rich countries have not yet met our existing adaptation finance pledges. The inequities go deeper. The wealth of westernized countries mostly came from an economic bonanza delivered by fossil fuels, with climate change as collateral damage. Cumulative emissions drive global warming. The largest carbon dioxide emitter, the United States accounts for 25% of historical emissions, but less than 5% of the world population. China, today's largest emitter, but with 4 times our population, has contributed just 14% of the total. Unsurprisingly, poorer nations now agitate to receive compensation for their disproportionate losses and damages. Initial discussions on this topic began last month, but they ended in stalemate. Although past emissions ensure that today's impacts will worsen, action now can enable the world to avoid the worst ravages of climate change. We must rapidly reduce emissions, 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050, even as we reinforce infrastructure and otherwise adapt to our evolving new normal. Damages in the United States alone have already exceeded $2 trillion. Experts project ever-growing losses, with high-end estimates globally exceeding 10% of global annual economic output. Climate action to diminish these damages will easily pay for itself. But inequality itself weighs against action. Both rich corporations and wealthy individuals obstruct political initiatives. Poor people rightfully fret about upfront costs. Finally, deep inequality erodes democracy, increasing the appeal of autocrats who may not prioritize climate policy. The trillions of dollars needed for climate mitigation, adaptation, and losses present an unprecedented opportunity for a just transition that addresses both climate and inequality. The Biden Climate Justice 40 initiative exemplifies this effort, pledging at least 40% of federal investments in climate and clean energy to disadvantaged communities. To address the climate alone will only deepen inequality. We can do both. As economist John Maynard Keynes during World War II said, if we can do it, we can afford it. So what does this mean for us? The climate emergency is a moral crisis, not just a physical one. Beyond its inequitable impacts in today's world, the changing climate lays a dreadful burden on our children and theirs, perhaps even beyond the seventh generation. Justice in today's world and between our world and that of our descendants imposes a moral imperative to address climate change. I believe that responding to that imperative involves four components. The first is to live mindfully, aware of our consumption and acting to reduce our carbon footprint. Realistically, few of us will become hermits. However, we can live more lightly in our fossil-fueled society within the means we have. However, resources differ among us. At age 80, more or less, my wife and I likely will not make major investments to reduce energy consumption in our home or buy an electric car. But we do mind our diet and our travel. We also make modest contributions to mostly local groups that support our less fortunate neighbors. She and I also offset our emissions through the Four Corners Carbon Offset Fund, which uses such contributions for grants to disadvantaged communities in our region for heat pumps that reduce both carbon footprint and home energy costs. Although we have no children, we know that parenthood can provide some of life's greatest joys, but it has costs that extend beyond the family. Providing a loving home for 20 years or more entails lots of material goods. Eventually, the grown children undertake their own consumption and likely have children themselves. Consequently, for young people, climate mindfulness includes the realization that having a child likely has the greatest climate impact of any action in their lives. The second component of addressing climate change is political and social action. However much we all reduce our individual carbon footprints, the magnitude of the transition requires change on a scale of a wartime mobilization. To continue that metaphor, the Allies in World War II could do it, and we afforded it. And we also afforded the reconstruction of war-torn nations. Working for change in our divided country is a discouraging challenge. Personally, one motivator for me has been compassion for the people and species suffering from human impacts on the planet. Retirement from science and teaching became a transition in my life to a second career of policy advocacy from which I do not foresee retiring as long as I am blessed with the good health to continue. Collectively, we must seek to elect leaders who understand the imperative for a just transition, but who also will do so without demonizing those who disagree politically. Locally, we can work within our own networks and organizations to build a more equitable and harmonious community with a smaller carbon footprint. However, the challenge of maintaining this effort brings us to the third component of addressing climate change: simply sustaining ourselves. The climate transition differs profoundly from wartime because it will last for generations. Besides, Though climate change is a stress multiplier, the world has abundant stress already. How can we, especially young people, continue the work without despairing? Thich Nhat Hanh, the author of today's reading and benediction, and he's been working for peace and justice he worked for 70 years of his 95 years, which ended recently. He writes passionately about this effort in his book, Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet. In it, he stresses the importance of mindfulness and awareness of Earth's beauty. Lately, I have been reciting a mantra from one of his earlier books. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is a beautiful moment. It always brings a smile to begin my day. Finally, today's reading highlights the essential fourth component of addressing climate change, the collective energy of supportive groups, our sanghas. Creating a just transition exceeds the ability or even of any individual, or even any generation. We need fellowship, such as the one that brings us together here, to energize and sustain this critical work in the community and in the world. Come here for reflection, for fellowship, and for support. Then, go out individually and collectively and keep working to make this beautiful planet more just and not as hot as it might become without all of our efforts.